Hello and welcome everybody, I'm Barbarian and this is winter teaser number 3. Today we have cultural traditions. This one is written by Trent and I myself didn't expect that we'd be here. These summer teasers that we had, that I know were quite thin. They were not really much to talk about, but this one there's a lot to talk about here, and more importantly, not just the actual features that are presented here, but I do think what is quite interesting is the actual design philosophy that is apparent when looking at the features themselves, because I do think that mentally I'm sort of already past Royal Court. Royal Court will be a lot of fun, I'm absolutely certain of this, but I am very eager to see what follows after, because obviously after a year of waiting for Royal Court, right, it is something where you already sort of move on with your mind, and I think that there is something in here that could sort of show us what Flavor Pack 2, or rather how Flavor Pack 2 could be constructed. That is something that I am of course thinking about, especially when comparing it to Flavor Pack 1, which was Northern Lords. Now, without further ado, let's just jump into this. In this short teaser today, I bring you more cultural traditions as well as previews of some cultures we haven't shown you before. Now you can see that Frankish is the original culture, then French diverged from Frankish in the year 862. 862, I've been told by a modder Wesh, that basically 862 was the win of Robert the Strong against the Viking navy that was hired by the Duke Salomon of Brittany. And that is supposedly when some historians, or many historians, honestly I don't actually know it because I haven't read any papers on this topic, but when they pinpoint the emergence of French culture, so that is why 862 is in here right there. They are courtly. This is not news, this is something we already knew. What I think is new, and I don't actually know how to pronounce it, Doyle? I'm not certain what the actual pronunciation here is, I'll be honest with you, but this is the Dual Vulgar language, and this one I think didn't have this terminology attached to it beforehand, Dual Vulgar. Either way, this is pretty neat. We can see the language right there. Then we have the Chanson de Geste. Oh, and I didn't realize this beforehand, but I would love it if we actually had two different icons. Actually, honestly, now that I think about it, they do say this later, that some of the traditions that are cultural, that are regional traditions, they are more specific versions of a different tradition. So maybe Chanson de Geste is a more specific version of chivalry, in which case chivalry might not have to be here, right? Either way, let's just take a look at Chanson de Geste. This tradition allows the culture to unlock the valet innovation in the late medieval era. Let's just quickly take a look at that. The valet medieval innovation right there. Nope, wait a minute. It is right here. Late medieval era, and can recruit gendarmes as men-at-arms. So these are heavy cavalry, of course, and also something, of course, that only the French can do at that point. So the interesting point, or the interesting concept that we have here already, and I believe this has been shown off in the past. We've talked about this, but I haven't talked about this in the context of other flavor packs and other DLC that could possibly come out, other content that could come out, is the question of units and of innovations being behind cultural tenets. At the start of CK3, when it was released, I definitely was in the camp of basically saying regional and cultural innovations are interesting, but there is a lot of potential for exploiting it, or for desiring or needing to exploit it, because you can't actually acquire these unless you flip yourself to that culture, pick up some of those men-at-arms and then convert back, right? That is the sort of stuff that went through my head, because if you wanted any sort of a hybrid culture at the time, if you wanted anything that is related to these, cultural innovations that you can't acquire otherwise, you would have to flip. And this is completely gone with these traditions. You can simply hybridize, you can diverge and pick this up and so on and so forth, right? You can have your culture adopt these traditions that will allow you to have valets, and with that the gendarmerie. You can do all of this without ever needing to even be close to the French. I am personally a pretty big fan of this. I think this is one of those approaches where you make it more modular by saying, instead of me having to cheese it, me having to move on to this different culture, I can simply add this to my existing culture. And this is a big point, as we are going to be seeing later, because there are some very culture-specific decisions that could, instead of being tied to a culture, be tied to a tradition as well. I want to show that off later, and that could be something, meaningful, for example, for the upcoming flavor pack, whatever that may be. Again, the flavor pack hasn't even been announced or anything, but we know it's going to be there because it is, of course, a part of the Royal Edition. You can also see the Poet trait has additional bonuses. The Poet trait is more common. This is interesting to me, and we will see this even further here with the martial education traits being more valued. Bumbling Squire, Confident Knight, Formidable Banneret, and Famous Champion traits are more valued, and then the Blade Master trait has additional bonuses, and Craven and Content traits are looked down upon. This is pretty cool, because what we have right here is basically an extended form of the tenets and doctrines, and most importantly, the virtues and sins of religions. So let's say you have virtues and sins, and currently all of this is done right there. The Nords in particular, with their Sartre religion, they have a very specific focus on, I believe, one-eyed, because Odin was one-eyed. You could theoretically, if you have something that isn't from a religious basis, but that stems from the cultural basis, you could have something very similar, because you get an opinion bonus, is basically what you get with the sins and virtues, although of course they also give you a piety impact, but primarily it is of course always, I think, about the opinion bonus, and you can have this per culture now as well. This is really neat. I personally, again, I really like this. They're making it much more modular. You can have, instead of having everything via the religious option, just think of a mod, you know, for example, where you have the Northmen, or where you have, for example, people, you know, that are the Lannisters or the Dawn people that are all, of course, in Game of Thrones. So in Westeros, you can have a situation where they can share religion. I mean, the Northmen not really, because they worship the old gods, but with the southern peoples, right, you can have the 7 gods, the new gods. And then on top of that, you can have the cultural modifications. For example, Dawn, I assume stubborn might be something that they see as a virtuous thing, or rather as a good thing, whereas the 7 don't see it that way. Do the Dornish actually worship the 7? I think they do, right? But honestly, don't quote me on this. I did not read the book. But what matters much more here is that I like how they are splitting this. Again, I'm going to come to that in just a second when we go into the Northern Lords pack, and what I didn't find so well done about the Northern Lords pack, right? And how this could be changed with this very design approach. We're going to see that in just a bit. Either way, this is a pretty cool modifier. Chanson de Geste definitely will change it, you know, change your playstyle. You will be looking at portraits, you will be looking at martial education as much more, because that alone will give you an opinion benefit that otherwise you would only achieve if you, for example, go diplomatic or so on. In some cases, cultural traditions are regional variants on more generically available one. I assume that Chanson de Geste and Chivalry is basically this. It has the same image, right? This one is just slightly different. Instead of the more widely available martial admiration tradition, what we've shown previously, the cultures that have a Frankish heritage will have access to the Chanson de Geste tradition. This both grants access to the valet innovation when the late medieval era comes around, I can't read, and highlights the role of troubadours in the French region. This culture values the heroic deeds of long-gone ancestors. The romantic retelling of the lives of knights such as Guillaume or Roland will inspire generations to come. I do hope that I can pick this up if I'm not Frankish in my heritage. I can see that this could be locked, but I personally think that this, if you want to have this as a generalization, is just an extreme sort of worship of this culture, right? Of this honor culture. And I don't see why a different culture shouldn't be able to adopt it just because they aren't Frankish. I can see, though, maybe they're not going to allow this. Maybe you have to take Chivalry, which would be fine. But in general, this sort of specialization on the traditional level is a very good idea, in my opinion. We have it here as well with Performative Honor. Performative honor. Characters of this culture may become shield maidens if their faith's gender doctrines are biased against them. Crimes by characters that you cannot imprison and who aren't your liege may be settled via single combat. The Craven trait drains monthly prestige, and traits such as weak or delicate are looked down upon. So, what do we have here? First of all, this is of course primarily oriented towards people that have Northern Lords. It reads down here as well. For those that have Flavor Pack 1, the Shield Maiden related content is now connected to a new cultural tradition called Performative Honor, which is available for cultures of the North Germanic heritage. All of a sudden, this is heavily in this tradition framework, right? You can move this on, you can hopefully, again I'm saying hopefully, but you can hopefully adapt or adopt Performative Honor as well. Actually, now that I'm looking at this, this screen looks like the adoption screen. This one doesn't. This is the actual French screen, right? But right here, you have a cost attached to it and how long it takes to implement it. I'm pretty sure Performative Honor is free for others to adopt as well, which is really cool, because that is what I'm talking about. No longer do you need to adopt a religion, or no longer do you need to become a culture to take, for example, you know, certain men at arms or something. No, you can take this into your own culture, via hybridization, via divergence, via reformation. I really like this. This makes it so that I can have this culture without needing to be Norse. I can have this culture that worships shield maidens, that basically says you need to be able to fight, you can prove your strength, and then you are a valuable member of our forces. That sort of stuff. I really like that. If you can implement that as well, obviously very expensive, 5,000 prestige, Jesus Christ. But as a whole, that is pretty cool. Interesting though that it refers to Swedish characters. Sweden, shouldn't the Swedish have this? Well, either way, listen, here's where I'm coming from. I like the approach that they are clearly taking here, where if you are in a certain culture and in a certain religion, you will have starting conditions that give you a unique game experience, but as a different culture and as a different religion, you can adopt those if you think that they are worthwhile and, more importantly, that they fit your roleplay. Why is this such a big point for me? Obviously, this sort of unique feeling of a certain area and, you know, making it so that if I play, you know, the Norse tribal or if I play German Catholic feudal, it needs to feel differently. Obviously, that is a big intention that they have and a big focus that they've had for many games, but if you think back to CK2, for example, to Northern Lords. Northern Lords were on that in a second, but if you think back to CK2, there was basically no way to really adopt what was going on, for example, in nomad societies without either cheesing your way into becoming nomad. It wasn't even intended. I know I did it. It was a lot of fun, but without doing that, not really viable, or without adopting their faith and then converting, or rather reforming it, right? It was a very, it was not a robust and not a flexible system. It fell apart as soon as you wanted to mix the two approaches that existed. Individually, nomads and feudal people and even tribal people in CK2 played very differently, but the actual moving in between, the flexibility between these systems wasn't really a given. And this is also true, in my opinion, for Northern Lords. What in particular do I mean? I mean my favorite Northern Lord system that was completely understated, was never brought up in the promotional material, and that I found by accident. I am referring to the Danelaw decision. Negotiate the Danelaw. If you don't know what I'm talking about and why I'm such a big fan, I made a video on it. I was a huge fan of this mechanic. Basically, you sit down, you conquer a part of England. I'm Jorvik right here. I just did it really quickly because it's not that big a challenge. And then you can say, hey, my friend, down there, the English, as it was in real life, would you like to negotiate? Would you like to get to a peace, to at least an armistice agreement, so that we can just live as neighbors? I'm gonna send my letter, and all of a sudden he gets England, I get the Danelaw. Whether him getting England, whether me getting this kingdom title, right, that is balancing. There are some decisions where I'm not certain whether they are necessary, but what this opens up for you as the player is the fact that if you conquer a new English duchy, you can see it right now, that the Euro laws are this is me, this is England. If I conquer the Duchy of Mercia, I will suddenly, all of a sudden, be in a position where Mercia can be added to my realm via the Integrate English Duchy decision. And this is a unique take on the Euro territory, this is a unique take on an invasion, and a unique take on basically the interaction between invaders and the invaded. Has never been done before, and I like this mechanic a lot. I can always tell where Ewan Coeycraft wrote this mechanic. It's such a good mechanic, one of my favorite mechanics in this entire DLC, seriously. And what I hated about it is that this mechanic is based on decisions, on events, on fundamentally just scripting. It's not applicable anywhere outside of the British Isles. It is not intended to be applicable anywhere outside of the British Isles, and it can't be utilized by anybody except these very specific people that are here, that are Norse, that are in the Daneland, that haven't advanced far enough, etc, etc. I love this mechanic, but this mechanic does not have the same approach as what they are now doing in the Royal Court, where they are saying, look at that, the Norse, they have shield maidens, that is very important to them, that plays a big role, but nobody else can have it. In the Royal Court, all of a sudden it says you can do this. If you reform your culture towards it, then this is completely viable. It can be done. It's not an issue. I think it is currently done via... Right? Where are we here? Am I mistaken here? See, I actually didn't even look this up. I wasn't sure of this, but shield maidens in Northern Lords are much like what I just criticized, the Danelaw decision. They aren't even a part of the religion or culture. I was convinced it would be a cultural or regional thing, but it is not. It is just a normal decision that only asks, are you Norse? Are you tribal? Is it a woman that has more than 12 prowess and closely related to you? And that's it. There is no way to assign shield maidens from the Northern Lord edition to any other system. With the Royal Court, they are clearly taking a different path. They are very clearly saying, screw that, we're going to move ahead and make it much more modular. They're doing this for the shield maidens, and this is, as I just pointed out, a very different gameplay approach. A positive gameplay approach, in my opinion. Northern Lords, again, good DLC. I would even say like close to a great DLC, but at the same time, there were these things with really interesting mechanics where it wasn't fully expanded upon, in particular the Danelaw. The Danelaw hasn't been mentioned. I don't think the Danelaw is going to be approached in a more modular way. I don't think the mechanic is going to be approached, for example, if I'm hasty and I take over North Africa, right? I can't negotiate with the North Africans there, although I should be able to do it. I'm just saying that. And this brings me to this fundamental assumption on my end that I think Northern Lords, as much as it was pretty good, is also something that they are currently, or rather this design philosophy is not something that they're currently going after. They're going after a more modular, after a more granular, and after something that the player has more power over. Instead of saying you are Norse so you can do that, and you are not Norse so you can't do that, they are saying you can adopt it. Maybe they're going to rework that with a Danelaw as well, but in general, you know, in this very dev diary, in general, I think it is very fair to say that they are going into a better direction of content delivery. You know, I to use Victoria 3's very nebulous term here, dynamic content delivery appears to be something that they are trying to do here. Where the Shield Maidens are no longer bound to being a character interaction that you only have if you have very specific circumstances, where instead the Shield Maidens can be done if you have the tradition. Maybe later on, if you have a certain culture clash, we can see something like the Danelaw mechanic with its own interface, because again, this is also one of my bigger criticisms of the entire system. It's just done via scripting, via, you know, a decision, and while it works, no doubt about it, it is not applicable anywhere except the Danelaw. This is the sort of stuff where I will say these teasers actually made me think about it, and that is why I wanted to bring it up here. I've never even considered that they have taken a completely different design approach compared to what we had in 1.0 and what we had in Northern Lords, where you were looking at something that just is. This system just is the way it is. This further liberalization of options that you have, that you can interact with in any given playthrough, no matter whether you start as Greek, Norse, or, you know, Sub-Saharan African, doesn't matter. You have options in front of you that you can employ if you have the right resources, like, for example, 5,000 prestige right here. I think that is really, really good, and I would like to see more of this. I do want to ask you, if you've played Northern Lords, if you haven't played Northern Lords, if you haven't bought it, why didn't you buy it, right? But more importantly, for the people that have bought it, that have played it, what did you think about the Danelaw? Is this something that you would like to, you know, you want them to explore this further? Because I certainly do, but I'm not sure how many people actually use the Danelaw decisions within the actual game. How often do you play as a Norse character in Britain, right? Just saying, if they liberalized this further, if they made it so that it's, for example, just a cultural clash, if the Seljuks come in, right, they could, unless they conquer all of Persia, they could maybe negotiate with the Persians about it. You need to be maybe just a duke, and then you can start negotiating. I would really, really like this. Let me know what you think, though. But yeah, that is something that came to mind when I was looking through this teaser. I said to myself, man, they're really, you know, just basically making so that you can diversify the impact of your culture much, much more than you ever could before that, because you would either have to be in that region or you would have to cheese your way by being the culture and then converting back. No longer is that necessary. All of a sudden you can go ahead and just, you know, add it to a culture. It's a huge step into the right, very modular direction, in my opinion. Now, let's continue. Here we have the Persian culture. Let's take a look at this. They have the Iranian language, Iranian heritage, martial men only, and Persian aesthetics. They have refined poetry, garden architects, dry land dwellers, and philosopher culture. Children are more likely to get the pensive trait and the rowdy trait, which makes it so that you are locked in the, or rather, well, not locked in, but you're leaning as a child much more to being open to the education, of course, in the learning discipline. Learning education traits and the scholar trait also give cultural fascination progress. That is such an interesting modifier. See, what I really like, and we had it up here as well, where prestige is trained via the craven trait, for example, where you can have something that you can do now, for example, like single combat right here, instead of, you know, other crime actions. This sort of stuff being open via the culture move also is really good for mods. It just makes it so that you have a lot of modifiers that you can have via these traditions. It is very much not limited. I'm a big fan of this, and in particular here, of course, with the Persians, I do wonder how this would impact, if you do a pure AI only game, the actual research rate in this region. Would the cultural heads on average be, you know, equipped with much more learning, or how would that plan out? Learning per level of fame +1, I like that as well. That is really, holy moly. Monthly learning lifestyle experience plus 20%, that is really big. I'm telling you right now, that is really big. One of the traditions of Persian culture highlights the prevalence of philosophical thought among its members. Another gives access to a royal gardener court position. I like that court positions can be opened up with this as well. Big fan. Again, the more effects can be done via traditions, the better it is for both the base game's, difference in play wherever you are, but more importantly also for the mods. Now here we have the Butre culture, so these are Berbers. Berber heritage, Berber language, marshalmen only, and Butre aesthetics, African tolerance, Saharan nomads, and desert ribats, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, which I'm probably not, can recruit Mulathamun as men-at-arms. The desert warrior commander trait is more common. Some commander traits and personality traits have extra dry terrain bonuses, and gain a decision to recruit dry terrain commanders. The mystic line of traits are more common. Really, really like this. There's so much variety in there. Men-at-arms, a commander trait, a commander and a personality trait that have extra bonuses just for this culture, then a decision to recruit very specific commanders, and that one trait is more common yet again. Big fan. Seriously, this is very diverse in its impacts. We don't just have gives you more money, gives you more piety, gives you more prestige, gives you more levies. You actually have sizable benefits here depending on who you're playing in the characters and in their traits and in their personalities. You know, when you look at, for example, the philosopher culture as well, I really like what they've been doing here. Cultures with a Berber heritage and a presence in desert or dry lands will have access to the Desert Ribats tradition, which unlocks the Mulathamun man-at-arms type, among other things. Catalan culture, let's take a look at this. They have the Doc vulgar language. I believe this is probably from Occitan, right? Iberian heritage, marshalmen only, and Catalan aesthetics, formed from Visigothic and Occitan in the year 900. Right, so Catalan culture does not exist originally when we start the game in 867. It will only be formed, hopefully, in most playthroughs, right, as it goes. What do we have here? Visigothic codes, parochialism, refined poetry, and maritime mercantilism. The trade port line of buildings can be constructed one era early. Pretty neat. You can change things, how quickly something is, open to you, how quickly the effects of an era are open to you. Big fan. Coastal holdings and counties in this culture provide an additional plus 10% tax. Boring, but necessary. Republic vassal opinion plus 10. The world may be ruled by armies, but this culture knows that it is truly controlled by whoever dominates the flow of gold across the seas. Maritime mercantilism is a tradition that makes coastal holdings more useful to a culture, as seen here in the lineup of Catalan traditions. Pretty neat. Cisalpine culture, what do we have here? We have Italian vulgar language. Oh, that used to be Latin. That definitely used to be Latin right here. Now it is Italian vulgar. Maritime mercantilism as well, and the Republican legacy. Rulers of this culture can appoint up to 4 counts to be overseers of local cities, turning them into Republican vassals. What you now have as character interactions options, as decision options, as event decision options, that sort of stuff, what you now have that can be unlocked by traditions is basically everything. At least that's the way it seems, right? You can take 4 counts and make them into Republican vassals. I really like it. I think this is an excellent step, and of course, in the light of the Cisalpine culture in particular, it's of course very interesting. They had a very strong city and urban culture developed fairly early on. In 800 already, in 867, we had Venice on the rise, because of the slave trade that they did facilitate from the Carolingians when the Carolingians captured heathens, for example, and brought down to the Muslims or to the Mediterranean in general. That brought a lot of wealth into the actual sphere of the Cisalpine culture right there, and had this sort of urban culture grow. So this is definitely a good depiction of this. Turning them into Republican vassals. This tradition allows a culture to unlock the pike columns innovation in the high medieval era. Look at this, very nice. City holdings give more taxes, development, and levies. City holdings significantly lower control gain, and Republican vassals above the rank of baron provide more taxes and levies, but Republic vassals opinion minus 20, because they see themselves as basically sent by the grace of God, right? As the ideal, as the proper rulers of these lands, and you shouldn't be taking their taxes. That is why they dislike you more. It makes a lot of sense to me as well. But it also encourages you to bring in more Republican vassals, which hopefully, whenever we get trade, whenever we get merchant republics, and trade is something that I have a very keen eye on, because I have been reading a lot about medieval trade, and there's a lot of theory that I've read on there, right? But whenever we get that, this would of course play an influence in why there are so many Italian merchant republics. They are benefited by this, so it is beneficial to just keep this tradition. Even if they dislike you, it will strengthen your entire hold on the seas. Any culture that has the Roman culture somewhere in its ancestry can adopt the Republican legacy tradition, so it does seem like it is very much, we have it up here as well, the Frankish culture, right? Like it is very much limited by this heritage to a certain degree. I wonder what other conditions you can apply for traditions, how you can prepare it, but Alright, listen, I don't like... I would prefer it if the cost simply increased significantly and you could still adopt it, but it is fair enough at the end of the day. There are certain, you know, traditions that really stem out of very specific circumstances that a culture grew up in. So yeah, it's fair enough in my opinion. Can adopt the Republican legacy tradition, which is a special version of the more generally available parochialism cultural tradition. We saw that up here. This is the Catalan culture right there, yep. This highlights the special Republican heritage in the italic sphere and will let you create a number of Republican vassals out of your counts who will become overseers or podestas. Big fan. Big fan. And then we have the Mongol culture as the last one here, I believe. They have the Mongolic language, Mongolic heritage, all of this makes sense. Prolific hunters, horse lords, and steppe tolerance. Counties of this culture are more easily converted to another faith. Rulers are less likely to demand conversion from their vassals. And all Mongol characters, different faith opinion plus 10. This is, you know, of course, they viewed their own faith as definitely a regional, as a faith of their people faith, rather than a faith that they should be spreading. So, yeah, they were quite accepting of other faiths. That is also a cornerstone, of course, of what the Mongol Empire was actually built up on. Different faith popular opinion, minus 25%, and faith conversion cost... Wait, different faith popular opinion, minus 25%. Isn't that negative? Maybe I'm misreading it. It's green. That seems good. Faith conversion cost minus 20% and faith creation and reformation cost minus 20%. Those who live on the steppe will always have much in common with those who share their way of life. Strangers may worship differently, but they still live in the saddle. The steppe tolerance tradition highlights that for some cultures, that what your subjects believe was not as important as it was for others. And that was all for this short winter teaser. These are some of my favorite, personal favorite traditions in the update. I hope you found them as interesting as I do. Trent Regular, first of all, thank you for sharing this, but as I brought up earlier, what I am taking away from this teaser primarily is that they are taking a different design approach of mechanics compared to what existed in Northern Lords and in 1.0. We are looking at mechanics all of a sudden being modular, being open for others, because, well, they are now traditions rather than just being an innovation. Yes, sometimes these traditions let you unlock something in a different innovation. Sometimes that is connected like this, but when I look at, for example, performative honor, instead of the game just saying, you can do this because you're Norse and that's it, there's no other thing that can let you do this, you can now employ this. I'm a big fan of this, and I hope that eventually we will see this exact impact for my favorite Northern Lords mechanic, which again is the wonderful Danelaw mechanic, because whenever we get an invader versus invadee, or rather versus invaded mechanic like this one, but for everyone, maybe with its own interface, maybe with any invasion where you are in a different area where your culture is not native to, right, that sort of thing, then you land there, you are a duke, and you can start negotiating. Whenever we see that for everybody, that is when I call Northern Lord a victory, and that is what I want from basically all flavor packs. Yes, I want region-specific mechanics, but I would prefer it if they weren't as inflexible as the one introduced with Northern Lords. The upcoming changes in 1.5, this wasn't even, of course, Royal Court. The actual traditions are all in the free update, right, in 1.5, but the upcoming changes have a design philosophy that I can support much, much more than the one in Northern Lords. Not that Northern Lords was bad, I think it was a solid DLC, quite personally, but I do think that the Danelaw thing has been sitting, it's been a thorn in my side for quite some time, so this teaser in particular made me think about it again, and yeah, let me know what you think. This was my argument for why we need to push for these sort of dynamics, why we need to push for mechanics that are applicable in other situations rather than mechanics that are just applicable in one state that may, or in one situation, may only work via decisions and so on. I want mechanics that are much more applicable, much more widely arranged, and can be utilized in a much more dynamic way. Let me know what you think. For the moment, I'll leave you right here. Have a nice Christmas, of course. I mean, I'll see you in other videos, but have a good time, and I'll see you later, alligator.